I am more than willing to bet that half of y'all, more than half, okay, would have an easier time naming off the top of your head a handful of politicians that you despise, that you can't stand, versus the own parts of your very penis. That's right. And your vajayjays, ladies, okay? But we're going to get a little sex education today, or as we'll say, a sexplanation, because I'm here with Alex Liu. Alex, this is just really a time to be alive, okay? Because Alex went on this journey. He is the director and the star of this new documentary, all about sex education, where it failed us, what the hell is going on, lack thereof, all of it. It has 100% score on Rotten Tomatoes. So that this shit is fresh, and it's been winning all of these festival awards. Okay. And it is so on brand for Cancel Me, Baby. It is irreverent, but it's heartfelt and it's sexy, and it just goes there. So without further ado, Alex, and how rudely he is covering his own ass on his own paper, his own poster. Alex, welcome to Cancel Me, Baby. I am so stoked. What a great, fun movie.
Thank you. I have chills. I have goosebumps. That was an amazing introduction. I don't know if I deserve that, but thank you for having me. This is just really, I've been looking forward to it all week.
Well, ditto. Wow. Listen, we're going to talk about, because this actually is perfect timing, because I'm on a sexploration of my own.
Cool. Great.
You have chills. My nipples are hard. And Alex, I'm not even wearing a bra. Let's go. So I feel like a crux of this film is your personal journey. You joke about being, a gay Asian 36-year-old, but I have to say, I'm watching this movie, and you're a fellow journalist. Although I do entertainment reporting, that's my background. Yours is you're a health reporter.
Yeah, health and science. Yeah.
Health and science. So I'm watching this movie, and I have to say, I feel like the good old gays and lesbos, y'all are old news at this point. I just feel like, you know what I mean? Because now we're in this time of non-binary and how you identify and trans and all this. And I almost feel like y'all may as well be straight now. It's lost in the sauce. So talk to me about that, because I follow, prominent journalists I love who are gay or lesbian. They talk about this all the time, where it's almost like getting lost in the shuffle. It's our struggle deserves to be recognized. It is Pride Month, right? So have you guys gotten lost in the shuffle a little bit?
I don't know if I feel that way. I will say this documentary took us 7 years from the first frame we shot to the first audience screening. And definitely it was 2014, 2021, that whole time, you could feel the language, the vocabulary, the topics being brought up, shifting and changing, yes, especially around gender. And then, I went to a lot of sex ed classes during this time, going to classes with, 14, 15-year-olds. And that was the first time in my life I was like, okay, I'm old. The language I use is no longer going to be acceptable 10 years from now. So yeah, I think it is somewhat this whole journey has been kind of like learning a new language. Frustrating, difficult, hard to learn later in life. But yeah, I think hopefully what I'm hoping, and I think it can go in a lot of different ways, but what I'm hoping is that through this whole process, especially with people like you and other people who have connected to the film, I was so scared that being a gay man, people wouldn't connect, that essentially we can all kind of come out with the fact that we're all a little queer in some way. We're all a little non-binary in some way. It's all a spectrum. And one of the best parts about this movie and making it has especially been kind of exploring not only that myself, but hearing from cis straight males who are now saying yeah, I've never talked about these things with my partners. No one in my life has ever talked about these things, and I've never felt safe to do it. But I now understand that doing only in that we all come out can everyone feel a little more safer about being who they are as a sexual being. Yeah.
Definitely. And on my show, I kind of poke fun at the idea of us labeling everything and having to put everyone in boxes, right? I'm like, can we just live? But I will say, you talk about everyone being a little bit on a spectrum. I'm a straight woman, and there is something about the androgynous woman who's like kind of has that male energy that I am like tongue tied. I am like tongue twisted. There's this barista at a Starbucks by me.
Me too.
Right? They have this like dick energy and like this confidence that I am like struggling with my words. Like I will say.
I think, sometimes I totally agree. I think sometimes we get so caught up in the label and the community and the tribe, rather than thinking about like, it's all, to me, kind of like part of the playground that is the human experience,
Right.
I'm so aware now, just like so conscious aware of like how much shame I feel about expressing any femininity for a lot of different reasons. But that's something where I'm like, that's crazy. Like I think to think about things more in frame of like, we all have masculine energy, we all have feminine energy. Sometimes it feels great, sometimes it doesn't. Some days you feel more masculine, some days you feel more feminine. It's all part of being alive. It's not a static thing. It is constantly changing. And just as your body changes, the people you meet change. You can be with someone else, you can be a total dom top, and someone else you're a little, submissive bottom. It's all part of the play of being a human. And I feel like the more we can all move towards that, rather than try to fit into something, even if it is like trans, male, female, non-binary, like those are also in a way cages, I think, that people don't really need to be in.
100%. Before I pivot, because I feel like that's an overarching idea of this movie, like especially with kids, right? In sex ed is the idea of informing yourself to like maximize your potential and your life and like, swing the tits and the dicks, right? But I do want to hone in on this idea quickly before we pivot, really though, about, the struggle, say, and the pride and the excitement and the glory of being gay. Because even like as a straight woman, it's talking about sex with your parents and navigating that and growing up, like that shit is awkward enough. Like that is awkward enough. So I always say like, being trans is one thing. I can't even imagine that, mental anguish, right, in that process. But I feel like, again, coming out with like your family and all that, I feel like that's a whole different struggle. And do you feel like, I know I mentioned this before, but like, because we've gone so far so fast, is there a part of that you do feel like is being brushed under the rug, like that struggle of just being gay, right?
I think that's a great question. I'll take it two ways. First, I think, yes, I think I will say, I think gay men do need to understand that they especially for many different reasons, gay men do have to think about the fact that they have a lot of privilege in many ways. I think that's totally a fair point.
Who would have thought?
Yeah, right. But I do think, that we have to be. It's important as much as you can to focus on everyone's individual humanity, and it is so difficult to be a human being. It is just so much suffering and pain, and the biggest tragedy is that one of the things that can really heal that pain of being a human, sexuality, is something that we're all forced to repress. It's something that we're all told to control and confine, which ultimately is just kind of doing violence to yourself. It often results in violence towards others. So I think, when talking about issues, and especially around the marginalization of sexual minorities, I think it's very clear in every conversation we have to be, it takes a lot of work, it's exhausting, as empathetic as possible to everyone's individual struggle. And some people do have a struggle that's more intense than others, right? And I think if you have to come out for any queer identity, it is, for the most part, unless you're very lucky to be born in the right place with the right parents, it is probably the scariest, most terrifying, traumatic thing you'll ever have to do in your life. So I think that's something that we all have to be really, really careful of. But I will say, I think on the flip side, I would say, like, doing this movie, I have so much more empathy for people who just haven't caught up. Like you said, it's happening so fast. And for many people, they're just not in a place where they meet many gay people, and especially they don't meet many out trans people. So I get that it's difficult to kind of keep up, and I get that it's very difficult and people are very impatient about that. But my process has always been, now after doing this, that we have to find a way to listen, empathize, and meet people where they're at, because that's the only way you're going to be able to persuade them of any other way of being.
You gave me chills. And I love that idea of empathy. It reminds me of this man. He's a Black gay man. He's on Bill Maher a lot. And he talked about this, where it's like, you know, even with the whole trans and gender and like, that whole thing, he's like, you know what, people kind of just caught up with gay marriage, which they're behind, like get with the times. So maybe like, let's give them a beat with people picking a whole different gender, right?
It sucks. I feel so strongly for those who have to, in their daily, like leaving the house is like a daily trauma, because they don't know if it's safe, you know? So I feel so strongly about that. But I do have faith that in totality, there's a lot of bad, but the good does outweigh the bad in humanity. You just have to take the time to find it, and it's work. I'm not gonna lie and say it's easy. You'll be frustrated a lot, but I think and I can just speak about my own father, right? Like when I came out of the closet, the first thing he told me was that the idea of two men being intimate disgusted him. 15 years later, he's marching in gay prides, going to gay bars. But it took time to get there. You know, it was not an easy road. But if you can show that person patience and love, and show up for them every day, and let them know that their fears maybe are not grounded in any reality. I've been amazed at how people can actually transform. So that gives me a little bit of hope. Yeah.
Oh, I love that, Alex. I'm going to pivot a little bit to kind of like a big picture. You talked about how we in this society, and this is another kind of like underlying theme of the movie, about how we're very kind of prude here. There's a lot of shame and guilt and like bad education, right? In sex ed, they just show you genital warts basically. And they're like, you will die a long, miserable death if you look at a fetus. But with that said, I also feel like we are in the most over-sexualized time we've ever been, right?
Yeah,
like even as a woman, full disclosure, it's like, bro, nothing's enough. Like now it's like the under boob and the thong. And it's like, oh my God, like it's crazy, right? Like you have Cardi B, you know, on a stripper pole at the Grammys. So talk to that dichotomy.
Yeah, I think the United States has the most cognitive dissonance when it comes to how we present sex and sexuality and how we actually live sex and sexuality. You know, I think more people will be willing to have sex on camera in many ways than they would actually be to talk about what actually turns them on, talk about the things that concern them about sex, you know, to actually talk about their actual emotional, spiritual life when it comes to sex and sexuality. And I think, I don't have a great answer for this in terms of, I honestly just do think like, because America is kind of like hyper capitalist as a country, like, and sex sells, we're willing to do that, to do what it takes to make a dollar. But when it comes to the actual like emotional well-being and spiritual well-being of our society and the people, that doesn't make money. So we don't put money into it. And I think a lot of other countries, when they think about sexual health, when they think about well-being, mental health, many countries that are as rich as us, or not, frankly, not as rich as us, realize that you know, with antibiotics, with contraception, with all the modern medical technologies, we can actually live a life that has very low sexual shame and have lots of great results. You know, live much happier, healthier lives. But in the United States, I think, you know, if sex is not tied somehow to work or tied somehow to productivity, it really isn't valued. And I think that you can see in frankly, like levels of watching porn, frankly, antidepressants, you know, frankly, well, a lot of societal ills could be solved if people can just be a little more sexually free and actually sexually liberated rather than what they present on Instagram.
Oh, it's so someone said it in your movie that it's that idea of what you're hitting home now of the superficiality of it.
Yeah.
And it's that I remember on a red carpet once I talked to Stephanie Beatriz, who's in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, about it.
Love
And
her.
she talked about, yeah, she's awesome. And she talked about this idea of like, again, the constant, like the Kardashians and this and that. And it's such a weird, that in and of itself, because it's like, you don't want to knock their hustle, but then on the other end of it, it's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And she said it perfect. She's like, it's almost like junk food. Like you consume, and then you feel like shit, like there's no substance, right? So
Yeah.
I always that was years ago when she said that. And it's like, it applies now more than ever.
Oh yeah, I think I experienced this for the first 10 years of me having sex. I was much more concerned about my performance. It was a much more performative experience.
Yeah.
It was much more about, do I look good? Am I the doing moaning correctly? Am I doing all the things that
Right lighting.
yeah, exactly, that the world has told me is what sex should look like and should be like, totally ignoring like the humanity of the person in front of me, you know, like actually having a real like soul bond. And I think for a lot of reasons, I think because, you know, so much of that, the idea of like, you know, sex is supposed to be like in marriage and it's like supposed to be a soul connection and all these things that are like tied to like really, you know, retrograde, you know, religious ideas. But I think there is a little bit of kernel of truth in that you can't, there is a problem if you flip too much the other way, where you just totally think of sex as like transactional, you know, something that is to get rather than something you get to share and give. You know, I fear that we're a culture that is much more willing to have sex than talk about sex, which it should really be the other way around. Yeah.
Something you and your bare ass are a step ahead of me, because you talked about.
I mean, I play into it too. You know, I get that it works in certain ways, but
Yes.
it's all part of a playground. I think that you need to be really clear of who you are and what you're doing. Yeah.
Listen, I show my cleavage in every episode, and that shit is not because I ran out of clean laundry, right? Like on some level, but something that was so refreshing about this movie. I also love the pace of it. It's very kind of like, it's not too ADD, but it has that sort of Snapchat, like very engaging feel.
Thank you for saying that. We spent a lot of time making sure that you wouldn't have, it didn't feel like homework to watch, because, and that every interview is short, get to the point, joke, on to the next. Yeah, that was our goal.
Oh, the sex ed assignment was understood. But something that you do that's so refreshing is you talk to both sides of the aisle politically. You are literally in a rally of these women with pussy hats that are like, my body. And then you are in a pro-life, like you talk to a Republican politician who talks about you know, porn and how that's detrimental. You talk to a priest. So talk to me, Alex. I know we're running out of time, but talk to me about your big takeaways from talking. And you admit your own biases too, which I love, but talk about, you know, the two sides and your big takeaways and a happy medium there.
Yeah, I love that question. So I would say, like, I think it became very clear in making the movie that sex is so tied to a person's individual values. You know, it's almost impossible to separate. And so I think it became clear in making the movie, especially since I was like, I started to try to be the objective observer, but it was so obvious very clearly, like, I'm not objective in any way when it comes to sexuality. So I had to make that very clear and very open, because I think the only way we get to a place of understanding is if we're all just like crystal clear about our biases, our values, our judgments, our agendas. And so I think part of the film really was going to try to challenge those, because I think a big problem that we all experience, and I play into this a lot, is sticking to our bubbles, reinforcing the values and ideas we already have, never really challenging them. And in the worst case scenarios, and I'm so guilty of this, caricaturizing, demonizing, looking at the other side in total bad faith. And so I think part of the film, at first I was prepared to go to these places and like just demolish them. Like the goal of these interviews at the beginning was like, I'm going to show the world how you're awful. But it became clear, you know, if the whole message of the movie was that I was asking the world to look at me, and if you don't accept me, tolerate me, at least listen to what I have to say without judgment, if I'm not willing to extend the same thing to those people, I'm being a hypocrite, right? So I think it was important to me to go to these places and actually, in good faith, listen to where they were coming from, understand as best I could why they have the values they have and why they push the agendas they push, and try to explain why maybe they're not thinking about how those agendas are harmful to someone like me. And I think in those interviews, those are actually the interviews that will stick with me, I think, for a very long time, because it became clear that if there was any chance of convincing this person that their values were harmful, it was only if they saw me as a human being. And the only way they would see me as a human being is if I saw them as a human being. And so I think that's been the biggest struggle for me, to really try to have more of those conversations with family members, friends, people who maybe I've disconnected with over the last 5-10 years because of their politics, to try really hard to be that open place of non-judgmental listening, because I feel like that's what I've learned. It's not arguments or telling people or antagonizing people that gets them to change. It's being like almost like saintly listener that gets them to soften their stances.
And in the end, Alex, don't you feel like the sides, so to speak, we all have more in common than not? I mean,
Totally.
I talk about on my show common sense. And when it comes to this movie and what you did, I feel like a lot of these things are common sense, right? It's like, even with even like with porn and with kids, like, I feel like no one thinks that, excessive porn, which is dramatized for kids who have it accessible at all times at a really young age, is like healthy, right? Or in terms of like the government intervening with sex ed, like, what's not enough, what's too much, and how much is too much intervening. And you know what I mean? It's like a lot of these things I feel like we see eye to eye on more than not, probably.
Yeah, I think a good technique, you don't see it in the film, but how we would start all their interviews with people who maybe we had disagreeing views on, is let's start on all the things I know we agree on. We want kids to be as protected and safe as possible from abuse and harassment. That's a universal. We want kids to understand how to advocate for their bodies and how to understand, that at its best, sex is something that should be shared with someone you love and you trust, and at the very least, it should be a positive experience. Like things that we all, and then when you get down to it, there are differences, but I think you're totally right that there is at least a large, overwhelming majority of even Americans, where we all share much more than there's different, but because of many factors that we don't have to go into now, we focus on the differences, and really, I've been so heartened by some audiences, especially those who would identify more as Christian or religious, who were just so happy and willing to have a dialogue with me because I didn't make fun of them, which is kind of how they're presented in many ways by certain media outlets.
I love it. Lastly, Alex, for you again, I feel like an overarching theme and a takeaway is the idea, and even like from kids to grown adults, is the idea of constantly, informing yourself about what will help you make the best choices, what will make you feel the most empowered, what will maximize your sexuality for your day-to-day life, right? And something that was so striking to me, because I'm going through this sort of evolution personally right now, because I feel like as a woman, I always kind of inadvertently covered I'm very curvy, right? Kind of covered myself up to be like, well, no, I need to show them I'm smart because I'm smart and I'm right. It's like all these little things. And now I'm kind of stepping into like, well, no, I'm going to have, show the boobs and then blow their brains out with the words too, right? So that idea is really empowering. And in this movie, you are sitting down with a literal priest, like may as well be hugging a Bible. And even he says, and of course you have experts who say this in the movie as well, but he says that every interaction and encounter is sexual. Like that's how much of our identity that it is. And that is so striking and so powerful. So on a last note, speak to that and speak to through this process, how you think, women, gay men, whoever can really like play up to that and how it makes your life better.
I love that. So yeah, we spoke to a priest who really is I think because of he just sees that the Catholic Church is losing people. I mean, there's one end of like the horrible abuses that they've committed, but also
Of course.
they don't speak to people about sex and sexuality, the erotic, the way people actually experience it and live it. You know, that sex outside of marriage with people maybe you just met is just as emotionally filling and healthy and loving if you do it the right way. And the church immediately says that's wrong. And I think he's realizing that if there's any hope for a spiritual kind of a place for the church, they need to be talking about sex and sexuality. And I think I'm just so lucky. I feel so honored he was willing to sit down with us because, you know, the Catholic Church is not really on his side on a lot of these things. And yeah, but that interview, I feel like my life was different coming out of it. There's before that interview and after that interview that I think about sex for so much. It became, because I'm gay, I think, is that I thought it was something that you can just keep to the bedroom. You know, like to navigate a straight world, you have to hide that part of yourself. Maybe you can talk about your partner, you can talk about marriage, talk about kind of the more heteronormative trappings of the way I live. But the queerness, the gayness, the attraction I have towards all types of people, I have to kind of keep bottled up. And he was just kind of saying over and over again, you know, Jesus was a sexual being too. People forget that sexuality is not just intercourse. It's not even necessarily about physical touch. It's about the way we connect with each other in playful, pleasurable ways. And I love to hear that you're kind of embracing that. You know, I think about that too. I think about it's fun to walk into a room and really have thought about the way you appear and play and flirt. And I think about that too. Like I think about straight men. Like I'm kind of more flirtatious with straight men now than I've ever been in my life because of, I mean, I it's very new and I feel very scared and safe, but I've been so, I think also straight men also want to have that playfulness in their life. They never had felt like it's safe too. And I think kind of, I'm interested to hear actually for you, like, do you feel like when you enter a room or you walk through a room, things are different for you now, or you kind of
Alex,
experience people differently?
Alex, everything. Even like so my new thing lately has literally been not wearing a bra. And I know it sounds so small, but I have big boobs, but I was having a conversation with a friend about it. And he's like, why do you always like, I always showed cleavage, of course, but he's like, why do you like, it's natural and it's gorgeous. And it's what makes you a woman. And again, it's that sexual power, right? So here's been my little experiment. I'm like, I can't go out without a bra. He's like, you always have them locked in these like, you know, grandma bras, like what's going on there? So Alex, it will literally even be like at a Starbucks. I'll notice it. Like it'll be like, oh, the drinks are on us, or like it makes you feel.
I love that. Yeah.
Right. And you with the straight men, it's even like me with the androgynous, you know, woman, like that idea. It's kind of like, you know, and I even think about it, how men do the same thing. Like, again, look at how your shirt is like showing off your arms. Like we all play to our strengths for a reason. Like we're not going out in potato sacks, right?
Yeah. We all look at the mirror before we leave the house. You know, let's not pretend like it's not a sexual part of your sexuality. And you can be afraid of it or you can play with it. And I think I love that, because I think a lot about how the reason why we want women to cover themselves up is because this is a power that a real power they have, and frankly, straight men are scared of it. But I think it's something that it's you know, you can be afraid of it and you can run away from it and try to control it, but ultimately that's like a losing game. That ultimately it does not serve your mental health or well-being. And so I love to hear that you're leaning into it, because life is short, and sex and sexuality is one of the best things we got.
100. It's like such a part of who we are. And that's why I love, even with that preset, like every little encounter, it could literally be ordering a Starbucks. You'll notice people are giddy. And here's the irony, Alex, is in 2018, I spearheaded a Playboy feature that I was in with other journalists. And this was the whole point. It was like, don't put us in a box. So we posed nude and wrote essays. But so you would think like, this is my mantra, right? And cut to what, 4 years later, it's like, I'm just getting around to actually living it now. Right?
You can understand something intellectually, but it takes so much time for the heart and soul to catch up. And I think that has been, I mean, I think, yeah, like the way I dress now versus the way I dressed before, there was so much of my life where I was like, oh, I'm being a slut, or I'm being too gay, or I'm being too queer. You know, and I think that's just so sad that so much of my life has been thought around that. And even if you are being kind of slutty in a Starbucks, let's say, with someone, isn't that kind of a fun way to be? You know, like isn't that kind of like an exciting moment in your life? And then that's something I'm like, well, why not play with it? What really is wrong with that?
Yes. So I wasn't going to tell this to my viewers, but we'll all go along on this journey. So we have the boobs. My next mission, and I'm working hard on it every single day, is like the butt now. And again, I know these seem like superficial things, but do you know what it is, Alex? And it speaks to everything, your movie, what we're talking about, it's power. And you and I, we're reporters, we're intellectuals. So that's power, but how limiting, like, why not the other one too? Because it's just, at that point, it's just no holds bar. It's like limitless to play at both, right?
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, we think of sex and sexuality devoid of gender, devoid of orientation, devoid of age even, you know, that it is something that we all get to experience together, whether it's just a friendly pat on the back, a compliment about a piece of clothing, you know, walking through the world deciding that today you want to feel real sexy. You know, all of that is part of the real kind of delicious nature of the human experience.
Yeah.
And that we work really hard to figure out how do we maximize those experiences while minimizing the risks. There are risks, of course, to everything. But rather than the other way around, whereas right now we focus so much on minimizing the risks and give an afterthought to maximizing the pleasure. But sex is at its core about one of the most intense, transcendent, you know, soul and life affirming pleasures. And so I think we're at a place in our history now that we can actually start to talk about it, and hopefully more people join us on this ride. Yeah.
Yes, Alex, thank you. You are welcome here anytime.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you for being so open-minded, in fact, that you literally masturbated on camera in front of basically a group of scientists with like plugs into your brain to see how masturbation works.
Yes,
so
that was not necessarily a fun day, but it was definitely something that I will remember forever. And I'm very glad I did. Yeah.
I bet masturbating in peace now is a luxury that you will never take.
Yeah. I am. Now that the world has kind of, that's kind of like almost the last taboo that now that the world has seen me masturbate, I just feel like I can do anything now.
Yes, I love it. Even like flirting with the straight guys. I love the challenge. Like,
exactly.
Yes. Alex, thank you so much. And thank you for your beautifully put sexplanation.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thank you for the time. It just means more than you can ever imagine that you'd be willing to sit down and talk with me.
Absolutely. It's so mutual. And thank you for your work here.